So if one commits, for example, in the Roman Catholic system, a mortal sin, one loses the charity necessary to experience the beatific vision. In Roman Catholic theology, you then go to confession, which then absolves you of the eternal debt, and then you still have, most likely, temporal debts that you still owe. This is where indulgences come into play in their system. All of that's a much Roman Catholic sacramentology, but it's relevant to this because the root of all of this, what's going on with the Roman Catholic system, is precisely this divorcing way back at various junctures in Catholic theological development. The divorcing between the morals and the dogmatic theology, such that, for example, you could have Borgia popes who are completely wicked. They've got, Alexander has tunnels underneath the Vatican from the Borgia apartments to the whorehouse that he has. And would that they were only into the ladies, not even into the ladies anymore, right? But he's still the Holy Father, right? Now, I'm not saying that, again, any sin suddenly invalidates the church, quote unquote, right? So this is not Donatism. The response to Donatism, though, went in the opposite direction of basically formalizing everything, making everything a kind of juridical, institutional thing, to the extent that the institutional body begins to gradually replace even God himself. That's my view. Now, of course, Roman Catholics are going to differ. But what are we seeing the papacy do? Not only does the papacy make what you could argue even in the high Middle Ages was, I think the theology is wrong, but you could argue, well, they're making rulings on different positions and different issues and judging between issues, right? Oh, it's the Roman Catholics. Oh, it's like Moses. He's making judgments between cases. Even if that were the case, and I don't think it is, what happens when we get to the point where now even natural law, according to the Roman Catholic system of what natural law is, natural justice can now be altered, updated, and changed? And we've shown multiple times that has in fact happened, particularly with Pope Francis. But it's not just Pope Francis. This actually goes back to the Renaissance period. And I keep talking about this book because it's really good for those interested in the specifics of the real hotbed of time between for the split between East and West, right? What is that hotbed time? 900s to 1400s. That's the time period where the two churches go in different directions. And so the question becomes, then, who's the authentic church of the first 1,000 years? And if the thesis is right of Father Moses that theological errors are usually rooted in moral errors, we will eventually see moral errors, regardless of what we know of the theology. So we can set aside people's knowledge of medieval scholasticism and who has mastered the Summa and who understands the nuances of Suarez versus Bellarmine. We don't even need any of that. You can set all that aside because, as Father Moses says, eventually the moral errors, which were the root of the theological errors, will surface and you'll get moral errors evidenced in theology, you see. In other words, if the papacy is the institution that has innovated and that has moved away from the conciliar Christianity the first 1,000 years, which is the Orthodox thesis, then we would begin to see the diagnoses of that problem from the Orthodox mindset proving true. And the diagnosis, as exemplified again by Father Moses, if you watched him on Kotel's stream a few weeks ago, the diagnosis would be, from his vantage point, which I think is correct, is that, well, the real issues here are moral corruption, which will then lead to a corruption in the dogmas, And morals are actually part of the dogmas, and so eventually you will see a corruption in the morals. And that is precisely what we have seen. But the most recent development is not just a development in the morals, development in morals and a contradiction in one topic. There have been plenty of others. The position on usury by the papacy has changed. The position on the death penalty has changed. In fact, I think Tim Gordon even had a debate with Trent Horn on that. I think they had a debate on that. I think that debate is on Catholic Answers. I haven't actually heard this debate, but Tim mentioned it to me a while back. I haven't heard it yet. But point being is that, well, if Francis is there to clarify, it's interesting that we're having debates on what the Catholic position is on the death penalty because, I mean, it shouldn't change, correct? I mean, in classic Catholic moral theology, the death penalty is a manifestation of natural justice. And when Francis, actually it was John Paul II that changed the position initially, but when Francis made it even clearer that the position has changed, Francis said that the death penalty is contrary to the gospel. Even stronger than it's abused. Sorry, you might make an argument that, well, the death penalty is abused in certain societies. Okay, but does that mean it's inherently morally wrong? Well, the abuse of something doesn't make something wrong, right? Fathers abuse their authority. Oh, I guess we should ban dads and fathers, right? Because it was abused. Well, no, it's silly. Nobody would argue that unless you're a pope-splainer. Then they would argue that because they're at the maximum, peak max meta level of coping such that the world has never seen. We're at the new level. But the new level of pope-splaining is a manifestation of the original pope-splaining that began in the 10th and 11th century. What do I mean by that? That is the century when we got Dictatus Papae. That is the century when we got Otto and 100 years of Germanic princes appointing the Pope, the papacy. Oh, but wait a minute. I thought this was the accusation against Orthodox. Caesaropapism. What about papalo-Caesarism? That's why you should read Christianity, the Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy by Meyendorff and Papadakis, because the book will demonstrate clear as day this massive alteration and revolution known as the Gregorian Reforms. And it is from this period that we get Dictatus Papae, which has the most outlandish and ridiculous claims for the papacy, some of which still exist in Roman Catholic canon law, such as the first see is judged by no one. That comes from a forgery. Still there.